Hey guys! So today I want to talk about 3 false beliefs that I had at the time that I was abused. It's kind of loud. Um, Hopefully you can still hear me. Okay, so number 1, right after the first time I was ever raped, I just 100% believed I had no value and that God hated me. Right? That he would want nothing to do with me. Nobody else knew what I did, but I figured if they did, they would also want nothing to do with me. But I figured God knows what I did because I blame myself, right? God knows what I did, so he obviously can't love me anymore. So that was the first false belief. The second belief, I kind of mentioned already. I believed it was my fault. I blame myself for getting myself into the situation for not being able to stop it, because I guess I'd always felt like with lessons growing up when they talked about, because I'd always had a goal and believed that I wanted to wait till marriage to have sex or to do even just certain sexual acts, right? And so a lot of time it was either flat out said or implied that pressure to stop the action was on the woman. And this is a false belief, because you are completely taking away men's ability to choose if you give them some kind of lame cop out like, oh, boys will be boys, or boys can't control themselves, or if you turn a guy on, like, he just has no control anymore. Like, no, you're a human being capable of choice, and like, you can't just make those kind of excuses and take away somebody's ability or responsibility, okay, or ability to choose something. So yeah, I felt like even though I didn't want what happened to happen, it felt like my fault because I couldn't stop it, or I thought maybe I didn't say no in the right way. He probably thought I was joking. He probably thought I wasn't serious. So it's my fault that I didn't say no in a different way. And at that point, I didn't realize it was rape, right? Because then people afterwards would always say things like, why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you punch him? Like, this is my boyfriend, and it never even crossed my mind to do something like that, because that's not how I understood rape. My understanding was a girl's jogging alone at night in a dark alley and stranger jumps her from behind the bushes, right? That was my understanding. Okay, great, don't go alone jogging at night. That's how I'm gonna stay safe. And then right before college, my parents gave me this article about date rape drugs, and so I was like, okay, also don't accept any drinks from a stranger. Perfect. Stranger danger, I'm good. This was my boyfriend. This was somebody I knew very well. There was no drugs. He never drugged me. It was just manipulation. And so I felt like it didn't even ever cross my mind that what had happened to me was rape, right? I didn't understand consent. I'd never had lessons like that. And to be honest, like, it wasn't something my parents understood in that way either. So I don't even know who would have taught that to me growing up, because I don't think anybody else understood it that way, We didn't have lessons like that or class discussions about that in high school. Not until I got to college did anything about that not being consent like even cross my mind, because that's when it was presented to me. So anyway, yes, second false belief was that it was my fault, and those were some of the reasons why. My third false belief, and this is one that I had during and after, it was a belief that I had to stay quiet about this, that it was better for this to stay hidden and secret. And I feel like it was my own belief and fear, and it was brought on by just kind of the nature of being abused, I think, you know, like it's kind of a secretive thing. And then afterwards, my abuser went around telling people his side, but would twist it really, and it made me even doubt if what I believed was real. And so for a long time I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want people to question me, because it made me question me. But eventually it got to the point, like, moved away, like got married, and I was able to do my group therapy class. And this is the biggest healer for me, like one of the best things, because it helped me connect with other survivors. But my belief that I need to stay quiet about this was still there, to the point where I was thinking about dropping out of this class, this group therapy class, because I didn't want other people to hear my story, because I thought, like everybody else in my past, they would tell me it was my fault. And I just still believed it was my fault. And so being able to open up and share with people who supported me, believed me, and loved me was amazing. It was incredible. It was incredibly healing. And just that validation was priceless. So my advice to people who feel really alone is to seek out other survivors and get that validation and support. Even if at first you don't tell your story, you just read other people's stories, that is extremely validating. But eventually you need to tell someone. And you might need to be careful about who you tell, to be honest, because I have had experiences telling the wrong people, and it probably set my healing back a long ways. Like, legitimately, the people you tell afterwards, if they handle it poorly, tell you it's your fault, and tell you all the reasons it's your fault, that is almost as hard as the abuse itself. Like, maybe that's hard for some people to understand, but really it was devastating to have people tell me that it was my fault, and that I was a liar, and that I was making it up to feel like a good Christian girl again, right? Kind of a thing. And like, you just don't want to repent, you just, for what you did wrong, and you just want to pretend like it wasn't your fault. And so those kind of comments, I dated guys who, in my church, right, if you do something immoral, you're supposed to confess, you're supposed to repent. And I dated guys who had gone through that process but hadn't really ever felt bad for what they had done. And so when I told them my story, they would say things to me like, oh, I wish I could have had sex without repenting. Like, buddy, this was rape, it wasn't sex. And that was when I even understood it a little bit better. And I wasn't just telling them my story, I was literally telling them I was raped. And yet they turned around and called it sex and made me feel like I was making this up, and that it was a desirable thing what happened to me, and that I should be grateful even. And just, I had lots of comments like that. So you gotta be careful who you talk to, because there are people who don't understand. There are people who will make it worse, and people who will just make it harder to heal if you believe what they say. Okay? I feel like obviously I'm to a good point now that I'm willing to talk about it, right, with whoever may come across this. So, I mean, it's been a process for me, like years and years and years, right? To the point years ago where I wouldn't ever, like, I felt like I would literally I would die if anybody knew. Like, it was this deep, dark, terrible secret, and I just felt so embarrassed and so ashamed, and felt like my fault, and so I didn't want anyone to know ever. And now I'm making YouTube videos about it. So, come a long way, I feel like. And yeah, so that, working back now, the third thing that is false is you don't have to keep this hidden because it's not your fault, right? That's false belief number 2 also, right? It's not your fault. You don't have to keep it hidden secret. Do be choosy for your own sake about who you tell this to initially, especially when you're still unsure of yourself and you're still healing and you are it's very tender, right? It's very close to your heart. It brings up a ton of emotion still to even talk about. I used to not be able to say not even think about this without just bawling. And now I feel like I'm to a place where it's a part of my past and the healing is a part of my present, and I can just kind of like look back at that without reliving it. Mostly. There are some things that still trigger me, but for the most part, I feel like I've moved past a lot of those things, and it gets better. It gets better with time, and it gets better with the right support. So please be careful of that. Finally, to address the first thing, because what happened to you is not your fault, and even if you feel like part of it is, even if you feel like you made choices and you made mistakes, I made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. That's part of being a human, right? You can't expect yourself to be perfect. You can't expect that you're going to be perfect and nothing bad will ever happen to you. That's nonsense. That's just not realistic. So please don't take blame for the abuse, okay? If you want to say, oh, I made some of these mistakes that maybe led me there, okay, make sure that you're not confusing the two, please. Please, please. Okay, you can take ownership of things in your past that you feel like truly were your fault. But being abused is not your fault. And, okay, people might disagree with me on this, but your brain changes after you've been abused. So a lot of the things you do after abuse, I'm not trying to give you a cop-out to live your life without responsibility, but I will tell you, your brain changes. And there are choices you make after you've been abused that I do not want you to blame yourself for, or hate yourself for, or say that you have no value because of this thing that happened and because of the choices you've made after. A lot of people turn to different kinds of things to cope with this: drugs, alcohol, sex, food, and it brings about these negative effects in your life. And then sometimes people think, well, what happened to me forever ago, okay, maybe that wasn't my fault, but all the poor choices I've made since, those are on me, and I just still have no value because of them. Please be gentle with yourself, and please don't have that conversation with yourself and tell yourself those terrible things. You would never be that mean to somebody else. You would never be that cruel and tell somebody else that they're worthless because they gained weight because they were abused, or because they had a drug addiction because of their abuse. You would never look at somebody and tell them that, right? So why do you say those things to yourself? This is just the most important thing that I want to leave this video with, is that your value is still intact. It doesn't change. No matter what happens to you, even if you feel like you've made mistakes, your value is the same. Please believe that, and please practice telling yourself that. It might sound silly or cheesy, but if you look at yourself, and I promise you probably won't believe it the first 100 times you do it, but if every day you look in the mirror and you can tell yourself that you have value, and you are lovable, you deserve to be respected and loved and treated well, those things eventually start to sink in the exact same way that the opposite took place in your heart. You started telling yourself, maybe other people started telling you first, but you believed them, and then you started repeating it. I'm worthless. I have no value. I have nothing to offer anyone. Why am I even here? And you started to believe those things. You started to feel them. If you practice telling yourself the opposite, those things can take place in your heart as well. Okay? So please remember, you are a child of God, and He loves you so much. Nothing you do or that anyone will ever do to you can ever change that. I have 3 children, and I tell you, there is nothing any of those children could ever do that would make me love them an ounce less. I love them so much, and God's love is so much more perfect than my love for my children. So please understand, I know it doesn't feel this way, but He loves you, and He wants you to talk to Him, and He will always love you, and He wants to find help for you. Okay, please believe Him and trust Him. You are loved. Thanks, friends. Hope this helped.